Welcome, everyone, and welcome, Mayor. It's been a long time.
It has been. Thank you.
And when you agreed to come on the show, I was absolutely thrilled. So my guest is Nancy Wilhelm-Morden, the first female mayor of Whistler.
It's true.
From 2011 to 2018. And before that, a municipal council person. I understand that they were named aldermen at some point.
Back in the day.
And that was started in 1984 that you
Right.
first became a council person. But your experience, as I understand, goes back to the early 70s at Whistler, when the local population was 600 people.
That's right.
And 10% of those were squatters,
That's
I think
true.
somebody said.
It's true.
And in 1973, it was the summer of love. It was replete with streakers and ski bums. And by the way, are people still called ski bums, or is the name modernized?
No, it's still ski bums.
Okay.
That's true.
Hot dogging back then, and squatters' cabins.
Yeah.
And my guest, the mayor, squatted in a rustic cabin.
It's true.
11 square meters that your boyfriend then built. Kerosene lamps, no electricity. Why do you have that big smile on your face?
Oh, those were fun times. We had a lot of fun then.
No running water?
Oh, we had running cold water from the creek.
Okay, Mayor, tell us about Whistler, which was then called Alta Lake. Tell us about Whistler in the 1970s and the early 70s.
It was an interesting place. I had never experienced anything like that before. I had come from Ontario, and I had come out to Alta Lake, as it was known, you're right, for a 2-week holiday. And I decided that when my now husband said that he was going to join the UIC ski team and he was going to log for the summer and ski for the winter. And I thought that sounded like a great idea, so I did that too. Back in those days, there was nobody under the age of 30. There were no children. There were no old people. It was just between 20-year-olds and 35-year-olds there to ski and enjoy the beautiful scenery and everything Whistler had to offer back in those days, which was considerable. It was a lot of fun.
You and I went to law school during the same period of time at UBC, but it seems we may have had different experiences in this way. Don't be worried, it's okay. In one interview, you have said, "I loved law school.
It's true.
The small classes, great professors, lifelong friends. I came out of law school with a lasting sense of the overriding importance of ethical conduct and reputation. It's guided me ever since in my professional career." Now, when I'm asked that question, I only say that I loved the beer ups, which guided me ever since, okay? But in all seriousness, Nancy, how is this sense of ethical conduct, which very few people gain at law school, I think, or even know that they, and it's not studied, how has that sense of ethical conduct and the importance of reputation, I think you said, guided you in both your legal and political careers?
It's been, both concepts have been fundamental for me, and it is true that I did learn both of them, the importance of both at law school. Maybe I had different professors than you did, but
Maybe.
It really has stood me in good stead ever since. I always make sure before I make a decision that it's one that I can live with, that it will maintain my reputation. And we go from there.
Okay. Do you recall any instance where you've had any ethical issues during your tenure as a lawyer or as a politician?
Certainly, they come up all the time, or they did come up all the time. Especially in the practice of law, you don't want to get close to that line where if you step over it, you think, whoa, this was not a good thing to have done. So you just never want to get to that position. But those questions do come up on a regular basis. With political life, of course, there is Not so much back when I first started politics, but certainly as time has gone by, there's this sense out there that politicians can't be trusted and that everybody's for sale. So ethical questions and issues with respect to reputation do come up as a politician regularly.
After law school, you started your own firm at Whistler,
I did.
eventually merging with Race and Company, the well-known Sea to Sky law firm with offices in Squamish and Whistler. So what kind of law did you initially practice?
I originally articled here in Vancouver for Sutton Braidwood. And when Rick Gopel, Bob Watson, and Tim Milady formed their own firm, they took me as their young associate with them. And so at Watson, Gopel, Milady, I did, for the 2 years that I was there, I did all kinds of work. I incorporated an insurance company, did a lot of trial work with Rick Gopel. He was a fabulous mentor. But then once I had my first baby, my husband and I had to figure out, were we going to live in Whistler or were we going to live in Vancouver? And the discussion didn't go very far because Whistler won that discussion hands down. And so I practiced on my own for a year and a half or so. And I was really worried that all I was going to be doing was conveyances and wills and estates, but it turned out to be anything but that. Lots of really interesting litigation. Whistler was just going through its early days, and so everything was new, everything was untested, and it was very, very exciting to be a young lawyer in Whistler in those days.
I'm going to get to some of those cases in the early days. So, do you recall your favorite part of practicing law, whether at when you're on your own or when you were part of Race and Company?
I loved going to court. I really did, and it was when you go to court, you have to be totally prepared because if you're not, the judge is going to find out pretty quickly that you don't really know what you're talking about. So you never want to be in that position. Yeah. And your position is tested by the person on the other side, obviously, but also by the judge. So you really have to be sure about your position. You have to have considered the arguments opposed to whatever it might be, the position you're taking, and go from there.
One of the partners at Race and Company has called you a trailblazer. I'm sure that's not the first time that's happened, Nancy. And that partner says, because of Nancy's trailblazing, it's been normal at Race and Company to have a strong female presence. It's been part of our culture for decades. One of the core values at the firm is family engagement, a focus on family life outside of work and engagement in the community. Now, the word community will come up again in our talk here. So to me, this focus on what we now call work-life balance, in Race and Company's case, it might have been work-family life balance, was well ahead of its time, it seems. Was that a culture that allowed you to excel as a lawyer, mom, and member of the community?
Absolutely. I had, when I joined Race and Company in 1988, I believe it was, I had very, very supportive partners in the firm itself. And I had two very young children. My daughter, Sarah, was born in 86, and my second daughter, Jessie, was born in 88. So without having, obviously my husband was very supportive as well, but without having supportive law partners, I would not have been able to succeed the way I did.
Whatever I read about you, Nancy, the word community, and very importantly, the importance of a strong resident community arises. So where did this sense of community come from in your early life?
Well, that was something that was drilled into us at home by my parents. They were very strong community members in the Kitchener-Waterloo area. They were very involved in their church. And they taught us the fundamental premise of giving back to your community to make it a better place to live. And I took those lessons with me when I moved out west.
And your daughters now are learning that, I understand.
That's true.
Yeah. So tell me, in your political career, there was a strong focus on the local resident community, and how important that was to this resort that was growing. So where did that come from, that importance of the local residents?
Well, I had always looked at Whistler as a very special place. And one of the key factors that made it that special place were the people who lived there. And I thought it was critical that we have a strong community to support the resort, but to also just make it such a wonderful place to visit. And for example, back in the late 80s, the council that I sat on at the time went on a field trip, and we went to various resorts in Colorado. And one of the places we went was Aspen. And we were in Aspen for 3 days before I saw a child, because nobody lived in Aspen. And so even though it was a beautiful place to visit and a wonderful place to ski, it didn't have that kind of, I don't want to say soul, but it was clearly missing something. And we came home from that trip and talked about the fact that there didn't seem to be a community, and what a difference comparing Whistler with Aspen, really, what a difference there was. And so right then and there, we formed the Whistler Housing Authority, WHA, this was the late 80s, so that we could ensure that at least 75% of our workforce actually lived in Whistler. And I truly believe that that's one of the reasons why Whistler is as successful as it is now, is because we've got a strong community.
Okay. About your practice and some of the cases you were involved in, I've read about a number of them. One of them was whether a road was public or private, and you called as witnesses Whistler's pioneers. Why was their evidence important?
Well, we had to show that the particular road in question was a traveled road, that people actually used it to get from point A to point B. So what better way to prove that than to bring a bunch of the pioneers who'd used that road since it was first constructed back when the train went through in 1912. And so it was a fascinating lawsuit because of all of this history that came out. And one of the stories that the judge actually mentioned in his reasons that he was quite taken with was there was a post office on this road at this particular juncture where the train went through as well. And the train would bring the mail up and throw the mail bag off to the side, and the postmaster would come and get it and sort the mail and so on. But if there was only one letter, it didn't make a lot of sense to the train master to actually slow the train down or to stop the train to pass the letter off to the postmaster. So he had a bag of potatoes, and he would take a potato and he'd thumbtack the letter to the potato and toss the potatoes to the postmaster, and off they'd go.
Oh, that's great.
Oh.
And another case that I read about that you were involved in is representing a Mr. Blackburn after Mr. Blackburn, a Quebec skier, and his wife, who succumbed to the weather. They were in the back country at Kicking Horse, and for 9 days. And you were involved in a lawsuit with respect to that. Can you tell us a bit about that?
That was one of the more interesting and troubling lawsuits of my career, actually. Gilles Blackburn and his wife, Marie-Josée Fortin, every year around Valentine's Day would go on a ski trip. And this particular time, they chose Kicking Horse Resort just outside of Golden. They'd never been there before, but everything they'd read about it was interesting to them. So they went up to ski that day, and when they got to the top of the lift, they saw a yellow rope. Of course, anybody who knows anything about skiing knows that you don't duck ropes. If you duck ropes, you're possibly going to get into trouble. But they looked over the edge on the other side of the ropes, and they saw lots of ski tracks down there. So they thought, well, obviously people are skiing down there. Let's give it a try. So they ducked the rope and down they went. Well, they didn't realize until they'd been down there for a couple of hours that there was no way out. It was actually a box canyon. And the only way to get out would have been to crawl back up the slope that they had just come down. But they were exhausted and they couldn't do it. They tried to do it and they couldn't do it. So they spent the first night in the box canyon. One night turned into another night, and it was 9 days and nights that they were out there. In the meantime, what Gilles had done was he had gone far up. He could see helicopters going over, back and forth over top of them, taking people heli-skiing. And he thought, I've got to get the attention of the pilot or the passengers to rescue us. And so he actually tramped up as far as he could go on this big open slope and stomped out SOS. And the SOS was actually seen by a ski guide, and the ski guide's name, I forget his name now, but he actually reported it to the police, to the RCMP, and the RCMP, who really don't know anything about skiing or searching, phoned the Golden Search and Rescue and said, we've got this report, what do you think? And there was bad blood between the ski guide and Golden Search and Rescue. And Golden Search and Rescue people said, oh, that's just so-and-so, he's making things up, there's nobody out there. And so the police never conducted a search, and it never called for a search. In the meantime, Marie-Josée passed away. They were there for 9 days with no food, hypothermic. And the very last day there was terrible weather coming in, and Gilles said, I've got to get out of here or I'm going to die too. And he put boughs, green boughs on the slope to make the SOS stand out more. And the ski guide saw that again, called the police and said, there's somebody out there. You've got to go. The weather's coming in. He's going to die. And so the police were convinced and they went out. And within an hour, they found him. They got him. They took him to the hospital and he survived. But unfortunately, his wife did not.
So was the cause of action one in some form of negligence?
It was negligence against the Golden Search and Rescue, against the RCMP, and against Kicking Horse Resort. Lots of more detail to this lawsuit, obviously, but...
Of course. So there's something new that we're going to do, you and I, and there actually is a question that's been generated by artificial intelligence that I'm going to ask.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes. Interesting. They were... it or they or artificial or whatever it is, was right on point. And the question is, generated by AI, what challenges did you face in transitioning from lawyer to mayor? And what strategies did you use to overcome those challenges?
Well, that's interesting. Now, just to be clear, while I was the mayor, I was still practicing full-time as a lawyer as well. And as a matter of fact, it was my legal training that really allowed me to be a good mayor, and forgive me if I'm bragging a little bit, but I think I was a good mayor. The ability to think critically is key to being a lawyer, and it was also key to being a politician, and in particular being the mayor.
And a key to not enjoying a lot of meetings, probably.
That's true. That's true.
So, what advice would you give to other lawyers who are considering venturing into politics?
Develop a thick skin if you don't have one already, and don't take yourself too seriously. Be prepared to keep an open door at all times. You have to be available to your constituents morning, noon, and night, and have fun.
What part of politics did you find most frustrating, if you did?
Communication sometimes got misconstrued or misunderstood, and issues would come up when they really didn't need to. And when that happened, it was very often just faulty communications, and that was frustrating to have that happen time and again.
When I read about you, one question really came to mind. How on earth did you maintain any semblance of work-life balance in the years practicing law, being a municipal politician, a mom, community member, inter alia, many other things, including making jam? How did you do it? Do you remember?
I do and I don't. You know, some of the really tough times I've just forgotten about. But no, it was because it was enjoyable. I loved doing it. I loved being the mayor. And so when you find a passion and you can fulfill that passion, then it's just all downhill from there.
Well, you certainly did fulfill it, Mayor, because a community foundation legacy story about you and your family talks about your political achievements, including preserving the Emerald Forest, which I understand was a really big thing for you, founding the Community Foundation of Whistler, paving the way for the Audain Art Museum. BC Transit started up during your tenure on council or mayor. Whistler North was developed, and we all know what Whistler North was like before it was Whistler North. Nestor's Waste Depot was created. Meadow Park Sports Center was built. And the Whistler Public Library moved to a wonderful new building. All of those things. Those are huge.
Yeah.
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 And those things must have made you proud to do all that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. In a way, it was easy because Whistler was in its infancy, and so everything was new. And so, you know, to a certain extent, it was being in the right place at the right time. But it was also so exciting to grow up with the town I lived in as it grew. Was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, really.
Many of our guests who are watching are going to be very interested in the fact that you were instrumental in maintaining old growth forests in and around Whistler, because there's trees that are over 250 years old.
1,000 years old.
1,000 years old.
Yeah.
Can you tell us the difficulties over the years in maintaining the natural beauty of the Whistler environment? At the same time, Whistler was growing to be the #1 ski resort in North America?
It was always a challenge because we were so aware that we had to just walk that fine line and not kill the goose that laid the golden egg, because one of the fundamental things that made Whistler such a unique place was the natural beauty. And if we if we mowed it all down and paved it all over, well, that would be the end of that. And there were enough people over the course of the 40 years that from the time Whistler was incorporated until today, who firmly believed the same thing I did. And so there were a lot of stewards of the place over the course of the years.
How tense was the tension between environmentalists and those who wished Whistler to become a world-class ski resort?
It would from time to time flare up, absolutely. And it was something that was always close to the top of the agenda as far as, you know, considering a new this or a new that, what impact it would have on the environment. And I think we were very successful over the years in maintaining that very fine balance.
How were those disputes resolved?
Through discussion, through lengthy meetings, sometimes through protest, very often with the cooperation and the guidance and the support of the provincial government. They were key over the years. We were very fortunate in achieving what we've done.
Right. So you were there at Whistler from the time you squatted to seeing the Four Seasons being built.
That's true.
When you look back, what's your most important legacy? I don't expect you to say the Four Seasons, okay?
No. I'm very proud of a few things. One is the Whistler Housing Authority. That made such a fundamental difference to the town of Whistler. I'm very proud of the Community Foundation of Whistler and the role that I played with founding it. I think its legacy fund now is well over $6 million, and it's plowing money back into the community on a regular basis. And I am so proud of the Audain Art Museum.
As you should be. During your tenure as mayor, Nancy, Whistler had an official community plan, OCP, otherwise known. And I understand it was quashed by the BC Supreme Court, the plan, because of a failure to adequately consult First Nations. So what steps were taken afterwards by you and your council to ensure there were consultations with the Indigenous groups at Whistler?
We went back to the drawing board, and I was very disappointed in that decision by the Supreme Court, and I disagreed with it, but we didn't have the wherewithal to be able to appeal it, unfortunately. But what it did do was it forced us back to the very beginning with looking at our First Nations partners and what their aims and goals were and how we could facilitate them and how we could communicate with them to ensure that we were all going in the same and correct direction. And ultimately, we were able to get a revised official community plan with the First Nations support.
The role of the First Nations at Whistler must have changed incredibly since you were first on council to the time that your tenure as mayor ended. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It did. Of course, we've got two First Nations, one to the north, the Lil'wat, and one to the south, the Squamish. And, you know, when I first became a politician, the First Nations were not involved, I think, in any way with local government. They just weren't, for whatever reason. So that changed and evolved over time. They are fundamental partners these days, and rightfully so.
Yeah. We're going to go back to housing. Housing was a problem in 1973 when there was next to none.
It's true.
And remained a major problem in a different way over the years because of the resort's exponential growth. We've all heard stories, maybe embellished in part, of young people renting a closet to sleep in for $500 a month and having to work 2 or 3 jobs to do that. You as mayor initiated the mayor's task force on resident housing, and you said, it's a challenge when we live in a narrow valley with limited land space, when we have limits to growth set out in our OCP, and when we are such a desirable place to live. So how much frustration was it for you as mayor, this housing issue?
It's been top of the agenda right from the beginning. I mean, that's why my husband and I squatted, is because we couldn't find a place to live. And back in the day, I think you cited the correct statistic that there were 10% of the population were living in the bush in squatters' cabins, because it was so difficult back in the 70s and into the early 80s. Once we formed the Whistler Housing Authority, we really had a much clearer path to follow, and the WHA has been very successful. That said, housing, you're quite right to point out that housing still is a significant issue for many people who want to live there, for employers in trying to find staff, and for people who want to live their entire lifespan, birth to death, in that town. So it's been a challenge. I think, you know, we've done a pretty good job, but there's more work to do.
If the new mayor phoned you, as he or she probably has, and said, help me on housing, give me some ideas, what would you say?
Well, I would point to the Whistler Housing Authority and how much it needs to be supported as time goes on. The Whistler Development Corporation is a corporation wholly owned by the municipality, which actually builds housing, and they've been very successful, and they continue to need support as well. So we've got the tools in place. We just have to stick to using them.
Okay. In 2016, you were called one of the strong, risk-taking women crucial for the development of Whistler, from the fledgling community in the 70s to the world-class resort it is today. In the same sentence, the famous senator from Whistler, Nancy Greenway, was mentioned. So do you remember any of the consequential risks that you took that resulted in Whistler as it is today?
Well, it's interesting just to step back for a minute, and whomever said that I was one of the strong women. Whistler back in the day had a lot of strong women, not just Nancy Rain, but the likes of Anne Chason, the founder of Sea to Sky Real Estate, Remax Sea to Sky Real Estate.
Going back to Myrtle Phillips.
Myrtle Phillips, exactly.
1914.
Exactly. So we've got a strong history of women who wanted to get things done.
Okay. How big was the smile on your face when the Olympics came to Whistler?
Well, now that's an interesting question because I actually wasn't an Olympic supporter. And I still have hesitations about...
Neither was your predecessor, Mr. Malamed.
Mr. Malamed, that's true. But that said, once we received the nomination, I wanted to ensure that we put the best foot forward, and we did. Whistler, the Vancouver Whistler Games were fabulous. I don't necessarily want to see them repeated in Whistler, but we had a wonderful time.
All right. Did you ever go on the bobsled course yourself?
I did.
I did too.
I went
my.
I bet I beat you on this one. I went with Justin Trudeau and his wife.
Oh, you did? Oh. There were a few swear words came out of my mouth when that thing started going fast.
No kidding, eh? And just when you thought it was going fast, it went faster. Yeah.
Okay. I have some rapid fire questions for you that we're going to end with, okay? What are you worried about? Ridge Runner, Franz's, or the toilet bowl?
Toilet bowl.
Why the toilet bowl? That was the worst thing to get through.
Oh, I just loved the way it undulated, and it was a great run. Still is.
It's not there anymore, is it?
Oh, yeah, really? Yeah. It's
The
not called toilet bowl. No.
Okay. The best bear or other wild animal story in the squat?
Well, one day I was working for the Department of Highways. I was on the drilling and blasting crew, and we were on early shift. And I had to get up and pack my lunch and all the rest and get to work by 5 o'clock in the morning. And I had left, and my husband, about 4 or 5 minutes after I had left, he heard this banging and ruckus outside, and he looked out. He was naked. He looked out. He opened the kitchen window and looked out, and there was a bear right about 5 feet away into our cooler, which at the time was sitting in the creek to stay cold. And I had clearly just walked by it and didn't know it was there. And my husband banged the pots and pans and all the rest of it to scare the bear away. But that was a little too close.
Him being nude didn't scare the bear away.
It should have.
Don't tell him I said that. Okay. Favorite onesie ski suit and its color?
Turquoise. Yeah, well, everybody had a turquoise onesie back in the day.
Favorite place to have a beer in the 70s?
Well, there was only one place to have a beer. That was the Boot. And periodically you would see a horse come in and mosey up to the bar, and the rider get a beer for 25 cents.
Worst job at Whistler?
Oh, I don't know that I want to answer that. One of the interesting jobs I had was working up in the Roundhouse. You and I were talking a little bit earlier about the green hot dogs that were served back in those days. That was a little embarrassing.
Favorite thing to do to chill when you were mayor?
Oh, that's interesting. I was a big runner back in those days, and so going for a good run would clear my head.
Okay. A strawberry sake margarita at Sushi Village, or a cinnamon and sugar beaver tail?
Oh, a sake.
Margarita?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Your favorite hike at Whistler?
Well, I love going into Blackcomb Glacier in the winter, hiking up and then skiing down that big bowl. I just love that.
Yeah. Now, you're allowed to say both in answer to this question. Would you rather have a photo taken in front of the Olympic rings near the skating rink, or in front of the stone landmark, the Inuit stone landmark, Inukshuk on the top of Seventh Heaven?
I like the Inukshuk.
Okay.
I do.
All right. Thanks, Mayor.
You're welcome.
It's been wonderful seeing you.
It's been really good.
I'm so glad we went to law school together, and I'm so glad that you developed Whistler into what it is today. I love it there, and a lot of it has to do with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm proud to know you because of that. Our next show is Tuesday, February 21, 2 weeks, and we have Melanie Ash, who's the Deputy Chief of in the Affirmative Litigation Division of New York City.
Oh,
So she's going to be our guest. Don't miss this one. It'll be very interesting. That will be our guest on Tuesday, February 21st. Mayor, have a wonderful trip back on the Sea to Sky Highway, which you were partly responsible for.
It's true.
And thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay.